Hey everyone, recall this specific series? It initially dropped way back in 2023, and subsequently, fresh installments ceased their arrival. But at last, this incredible work has staged a massive return. The narrative kicks off with your typical gate appearing scenario, creatures pouring through, and ordinary folks abruptly gaining extraordinary abilities. You've likely encountered this setup previously. These freshly empowered individuals transform into hunters, and their designated task involves tracking and eliminating the beasts. Jump ahead 10 years following this entire gate crisis, and we're introduced to our main character, Kong Ji-hyung. This guy gets crushed by an enormous diamond chunk. He collapses to the earth and begins hemorrhaging profusely. He's utterly certain he's a complete failure because, in contrast to the tormentors surrounding him, who've manifested showy special powers, his sole ability is regeneration. Now, theoretically speaking, regeneration classifies as an S-rank skill, but for Kong, it's less impressive. Each instance of healing inflicts agonizing pain, and compounding his misery, the bullies relentlessly assault him, observing his anguish during regeneration and mocking his suffering. It's utterly savage. Once Kong mends, not a single mark remains as evidence of his bullying and torment. Consequently, educators and law enforcement are powerless to intervene, given that these tormentors are S-rank awakened individuals. They enjoy various forms of preferential handling by the authorities. Thus, nobody dares to speak out in opposition. Kong is essentially ensnared within a framework that benefits the strong. His motivation for still tolerating all this hardship isn't due to weakness. It's on account of his mother. You understand, his father passed away when he was merely 5, and currently, he's toiling through this awakened specialization curriculum at high school solely to graduate, qualify as a hunter, and provide for her. He's been quietly enduring, believing that with his regenerative power, he might, at a minimum, achieve C-rank hunter status. The compensation wouldn't be substantial, yet he remained optimistic about achieving a superior existence alongside his mother, in a tranquil location, just the pair of them. However, that aspiration is brutally shattered on his mother's birthday. On that calamitous day, he discovers her hospitalization, following a severe beating administered by those very same tormentors. Currently, she lies in a comatose condition, and his entire reality disintegrates in a moment. The authorities label this event merely an accident, distorting the narrative, alleging that those empowered youths coincidentally appeared at his mother's dining establishment. But this is the actual sequence of events. One of those ruffians seized Kang's mother by her hand, attempting to flaunt his diamond-based powers and dazzle her with his ostentatious skills. She swiftly averted her gaze, and in doing so, the tormentor's phone slid from the table, shattering upon the floor. As Kang's mother worried over how to compensate for the damaged device, that scoundrel abruptly pierced a hole directly through her torso. And now, they're simply categorizing this merely as an accident, attributing it to their powers simply erupting in fury. Hearing this incensed Kong to the point his jaw tightened immensely, causing it to bleed and his teeth to fracture from the strain. His exasperation was absolutely through the roof. He understood this wasn't chance or some anger-driven mishap. This constituted murder, pure and straightforward. And at that instant, he morphed into an actual sanguinary, shattered beast. The cake he procured for his mother simply splattered onto the floor, a poignant memento of the existence he yearned to safeguard. The setting then transitions to the mountainous region close to the city, where those ruffians are casually relaxing. One among them, sporting brown hair, is panicking about the consequences should the woman perish. The diamond boy nonchalantly dismisses it, asserting no one is concerned. He leaps from the boulder he's perched upon and commences boasting about their youthfulness affording them protection. Under the law, and given their awakened status, no individual can pursue any judicial measures against them. The brown-haired youth still appears hesitant, and that is precisely when the diamond boy becomes irritated, inquiring if he genuinely believes that was his initial instance of assaulting someone. Precisely at that juncture, our main character materializes and starts sprinting towards those buffoons. They gaze at him, questioning who on earth he possibly could be. That's the moment Kong loses it, insisting on an explanation for their actions against his mother. It's then the diamond boy discerns Kang's identity and begins to taunt him, claiming ignorance about the woman being his mother because she appeared quite youthful. with a mere snap of his fingers. He impales a lengthy diamond spear directly into Kang's torso, nonchalantly boasting about his attempt to make advances on her. Kang clenches his jaw and commences extracting that enormous diamond spear from his chest cavity. His physique starts to mend itself, and the agony is unbearable, causing tears to flow down his cheeks. At last, he wrenches the spear loose, leaving a gaping wound that mends nearly instantaneously. The diamond boy swiftly materializes additional diamond lances, and with another deft finger movement, unleashes a volley of these piercing projectiles, impaling Kang's form from every angle. He's effectively immobilized on the earth, motionless and defenseless, as the crushing burden of his agony and fury presses upon him. Yet Kang rapidly battles against the suffering, propelling himself onward towards these fiends. His countenance is a horrifying spectacle, resembling a ravenous beast resolved to reach and dismember them. The Diamond Boy merely scoffs at Kang's wretched predicament and pivots to his companion, Thor, instructing him to demonstrate to this upstart his inferior stand. Thor wavers for a brief instant, visibly hesitant, yet ultimately resolves to employ his power. And as he acts, a colossal tempest of electricity plummets from above, jolting Kang to his very being, and he smashes back onto the earth headlong. A crimson trail left in his wake signifies his desperate effort. As he attempted to get to those scoundrels, they ultimately begin to move beyond him, believing they've triumphed. That's the moment Kang, driven by pure fury, seizes one of the brutes by his limb and demands of the villains where he's headed. The Diamond Boy is fed up with this nuisance clinging to them. He reinforces his hand with diamonds and lands a crushing impact squarely on Kang's cranium. He then retracts his arm and unleashes another swing, delivering yet another bone-shattering blow, persisting with the assault until Kang's face becomes a gory ruin. Then the scoundrel shoves his diamond-encased fist directly into Kang's mouth, rendering him breathless right after that. He summons his associate, Sandman, instructing him to begin excavating. Sandman immediately commences digging an opening, while Kang shivers and reviles them. The Gum Eater inquires about their intentions concerning him, to which the Diamond Boy simply orders him to be silent. That's when myriad diamond fragments erupt all around Kang, all positioned to completely envelop him. He execrates these villains as the fragments start coalescing around him and encase him entirely. Ultimately, Sandman heaps earth upon him, entombing Kang within a diamond-fashioned casket, leaving him confined in blackness. While ensnared within the diamond sarcophagus, Kang persistently shouts expletives over and over again, battering against the casket in utter despair. But profoundly within, he comprehends there's no possibility of escaping from the diamond enclosure. As the oxygen supply begins to dwindle, he starts to asphyxiate and, in due course, begins to lose awareness. Yet his mending power compels him to remain conscious. And every moment within that diamond confinement evolves into agonizing torment. In a surge of hopelessness, he seizes a keen diamond fragment, plunging it into his own body. Yet even this action fails to induce death. Instead, agonizing recollections of his mother surge through his thoughts, evoking her hardships and utter despair. It's a harsh paradox. His regenerative capacity prevents his demise, confining him to this agonizing state of being. He feels completely impotent, a spirit engulfed by hopelessness. Then, the realization strikes him. This is precisely his mother's current feeling, genuinely without hope and aid. This notion propels him to his breaking point, sparking a fierce resolve within, and he begins striking the coffin's confines, driven by a frantic aspiration to escape this torment, regardless of the duration it requires. He is resolute in his escape. He devotes hours to screaming and battering the enclosure before him. Yet no one is present in the mountains to perceive his lamentations. At this juncture, we will pause, and I shall elucidate how. The updated iteration of this manhwa has altered Kang's mending power into an exoskeleton materialization skill, enabling him to fortify his physique rather than being trapped in a casket. The revised edition presents the notion of the Crimson Gates. When those villains were tormenting him, a crimson gate materialized, and rather than alerting the proper channels, they hurled Kang within it. Essentially, a crimson gate is an occurrence where a portal becomes red, and creatures do not emerge from it. although extensive details regarding this haven't yet been disclosed. The rationale is that no one, upon entering a bloodgate, has ever returned alive. The location teems with every conceivable type of nightmarish beast, and Kong became a victim to those creatures. Recent studies indicate that individuals entering a bloodgate transform into monsters due to the mana within. Kong metamorphoses into one of the fiends inside the gate and savagely dismembers every other creature. That's how he morphs into this formidable, imposing character. Following a period, he at last bursts forth from the Crimson Gate, mightier than before. Owing to this enigmatic regenerative power, acquired from the Red Mist, and his exoskeleton also gained strength, after being repeatedly torn apart by monsters. In the previous iteration, it differs, and I will elaborate on that shortly. So, let us resume the earlier narrative thread. 5 years have elapsed since Kong was entrapped in the Diamond Casket. We observe those 3 ruffians who confined Kong in that infernal place, and they are currently being featured live on a program. The presenter refers to these villains as altruistic champions performing voluntary service for the nation. The despicable individuals assert they experience elation whenever aiding those requiring assistance, and they maintain that sentiment still. The host subsequently questions them regarding the hearsay about their history, particularly that they harmed a non-combatant 5 years prior owing to an uncontrolled power surge. Abrupt quietude descends upon the stage as the imbecile theatrically halts before erupting in feigned sorrow, alleging that the casualty was an intimate associate's mother. His 2 companions appear utterly perplexed, entirely disoriented by his complete fabrication of this nonsense. Then the Diamond Boy asserts he offered apologies to Kong, but has been unsuccessful in contacting him thereafter. He maintains his desire to apologize once more, and expresses sincere remorse for the incident. Precisely as he utters this, the primary entrance to the stage bursts open, and it hurtles directly towards the Diamond Boy, who swiftly protects himself using his diamond powers. He feels vexed as he scowls at whomever presumed to disrupt his minor spectacle. As the enigmatic presence moves into the illumination, pandemonium breaks out in the venue, with all scrambling for safety. The grotesque being commences its advance, each footfall vibrating the earth below them. And I am quite certain this beast is unequivocally Kong himself, who is currently gazing directly at the Diamond Boy, brimming with fury and a craving for retribution. At that instant, Kong propels himself from his position, and before the diamond individual can even respond, he perceives a fist hurtling directly towards his visage, poised to inflict severe cerebral trauma upon it, just as the suspense culminates at its zenith. And we are on the verge of observing the carnage. The setting reverts to the period when Kong remained imprisoned within that diamond sepulcher. He has forfeited all perception of time, oblivious if he's been confined there for a lunar cycle or perhaps even an entire year. All he comprehends is that the diamonds remain utterly unscathed. After battering those diamonds for an eternity, it seems, he discerns his mending power diverges from others. The constant wounds instigate an overabundant regeneration, and he transforms into a more potent iteration of his being. His external skeleton manifests, and within that tomb, he demolishes his physique repeatedly and continuously, mending himself each instance. He endures every iota of agony as his blood sprays, tissue rends, and bones fracture. Still, he persists in tearing himself asunder, and the torment intensifies beyond death itself. However, all that unbearable suffering yields results when he at last beholds the illumination of the external realm. In the current moment, the instant he connects a blow to that villain's face, the fellow's eyes almost bulge, and he is sent soaring, leaving his companions utterly astounded and motionless as they observe this veritable beast assaulting them. Unexpectedly, Kong recalls the taunts those imbeciles hurled his way, daring him to escape if he possessed the ability. And now, here he stands directly confronting them and informs them that he has ultimately caught them. Astonishingly, the Diamond Boy starts to retreat, and he swiftly instructs his companions to simply eliminate Kong. The lightning wielder, frantic to protect himself, attempts to jolt Kong with his electrical power, but it proves entirely ineffective on our protagonist. He simply tightens his mandible, driven by fury, and propels himself towards the lightning user, severing his head cleanly from his body. The decapitated head whirls through the atmosphere, gore spraying all around. The acephalous figure at last crumples along with its head. The other foolish adversary then attempts to subdue our protagonist, employing his sand abilities to materialize a cluster of boulders, attempting to pulverize him, but our hero just smashes directly through those stones, dislodging the debris and seizes this miscreant by his jaw. After immobilizing him on the earth, he unleashes his fist and wham, detonates his head entirely. While this transpires, the Diamond Boy furtively approaches from the rear and delivers a devastating impact squarely upon our hero's cranium. But regrettably for this foolish adversary, his hand simply fractures upon collision. Frantic, he materializes a massive quantity of diamond spikes and unleashes them simultaneously in Kang's direction. They penetrate directly through him, and crimson fluid begins to seep from every crevice and open. Yet notwithstanding all that, our protagonist begins to rise. The diamond wielder panics. He rapidly transmutes his entire form into diamonds and commences pummeling the life out of him. He's battering our hero with his full might. Reminiscent of past encounters, he even thrusts his fist into Kang's mouth, believing he has him trapped. But on this occasion, our hero simply bites down hard, and abruptly, the diamond hand begins to fracture under the strain. Our protagonist then impales a keen bone directly into the tormentor's torso. He's becoming frantic as our hero continues to force that bone further. In a final, desperate maneuver, the tormentor materializes an enormous diamond lance that erupts from the earth, impaling our hero squarely in the chest and hoisting him approximately 6 feet above the terrain. As Kong was being elevated into the atmosphere, the tormentor's hand remained caught beneath the jaw and he forfeited his arm. The formerly arrogant villain has transformed into a frightened whelp, and the sole thought occupying his mind at this moment is merely to flee with the utmost speed possible. But lamentably for him, he isn't escaping anywhere. Kong seizes one of those identical diamond spikes and hurls it directly into the poltroon's physique, immobilizing him on the spot. He begins to creep along the earth, writhing and mewling in agony as our hero advances upon it. He's imploring Kong to keep his distance. Yet we all recognize that no quantity of supplication will rescue him now. Now, our hero commences his brutal retribution, and gore erupts profusely as he impales the villain with those identical diamond spikes he was struck with previously. Once every one of those spikes is embedded within his form, he shivers, inquiring of our hero his very identity. Kong swiftly seizes his cranium and tears it asunder, exposing his entire visage, and just so, the tormentor's mind reverts to bygone days. The understanding strikes him forcefully. Upon recalling this is the very individual he formerly persecuted. Subsequently, Kong unleashes the full might of his vengeance, savagely beating the existence from this fellow. He's unyielding, battering him to a mash, unrestrained. No clemency is shown. Ultimately, he thrusts his hand into the tormentor's maw, and following one final instant, he retracts his hand, extinguishing the life of the scoundrel who turned his existence infernal. His vengeance is fulfilled. The individuals who tormented him are deceased. Those who harmed his blameless mother have at last faced retribution. Now, he merely remains, gazing at the sanguine pool below him, and as if prompted, the precipitation begins its downpour. His thoughts revert to the instant he emerged from the casket. His initial action was to hasten to his mother's side, who remained in a comatose condition at the medical facility. In the present instance, he shrieks and weeps as the deluge descends around him. Concurrently, another vibrant day breaks in the highlands. A colossal creature portal stands agape, and it appears an individual has previously dealt with all the beasts that attempted to emerge from within it. The whole band of adventurers is astonished this woman executed so capably, particularly given her assertion. It's her initial foray this far into the portal. She merely chuckles and conveys her appreciation, stating thanks for their protective oversight. But then the ruffians' demeanors transform from amiable to unsettling. They begin closing in on the woman, smirking malevolently as they articulate they are considerably more thankful to accompany her as they move towards the solitary female. She quakes with terror. One of the vile deviants ogles her, informing her that nobody is aware of events within the portal, and departure from this place might require a full lunar cycle. One of the brawny brutes seizes her hands, edging nearer and stating his eagerness to pass that month with her. The woman weeps upon hearing these callous individuals, exploiting her very exposed state. But prior to any developments, that very same brute is the initial one to be decapitated. The remaining ones pivot to ascertain who just took their comrade's head. Unsurprisingly, it is our protagonist, appearing as nothing less than a beast. Even the adventurers suspect they might have overlooked an actual fiend during their sweep of the vicinity. They commence unleashing their assaults, yet nothing harms him. All that flame and violet power simply dissipates as if inconsequential. A man wielding a blade lunges towards our hero, but the instant his weapon impacts those robust bones, it fragments into smithereens. The man observes powerlessly as his gleaming blade disintegrates just moments before he also falls lifeless. The surviving buffoons are aghast, wondering if creatures of this nature truly inhabit the portal. But before they can utter further absurdities, our hero sweeps his arm, and they're decapitated instantaneously. After felling everyone, he confidently walks towards the woman, who's shivering and weeping profusely as he towers above her. Like an absolute formidable presence, he observes her, head held aloft, but as her tears cascade down her cheeks, she begins expressing gratitude for preserving her existence. In reply, he courteously returns the sentiment by cleanly severing her head, and she perishes immediately as he stands, contemplating his decisions. His thoughts revert to that brief instance, when he had dispatched the tormentor. Abruptly, a woman materializes from his rear and inquires about his feelings now that he's achieved his retribution. She presents herself by the name Lee Human, the director of Korea's Hunter organization. Kong pivots at her vocalization and questions how she even possesses knowledge of him. She clarifies that she has been observing him since that event, 5 years prior, when his mother was harmed and he was interred beneath the earth. Without any pause, he propels himself towards her, his fist mere centimeters distant. When she abruptly declares her ability to save his mother, he halts instantly in his movement. Yet the power of his motion sends rubble airborne. He demands of her what on earth she is discussing, and she swiftly informs him of her capability to awaken his mother, because she is the sole S-rank healer available. Kong then inquires how he is meant to have faith in her. She brings to his attention it wasn't the medical facility sustaining his mother's life throughout those years, while he lay interred underground. Upon hearing this information, Kong gets straight to the point, asking what she desires as compensation. The woman grins and clarifies that the predicament is the hunters possess excessive strength. Most conventional armed forces cannot contend with them, and some hunters even surpass nuclear capabilities. Owing to them, the creatures within the portals have largely been eradicated. However, the portals themselves did not vanish. Now lacking monsters, those portals are utilized as thoroughfares, and countries employ them to conduct warfare using hunters. Indeed, Korea lacks sufficient hunters to repel the Japanese hunter incursions into their domain, but with our hero present now, she trusts he is the sole individual capable of managing this. She elucidates that, should they counter the Japanese with their own hunter forces, it will burgeon into all-out conflict. However, a creature like him shouldn't present any problem. So, fundamentally, she's requesting him to perform her unpleasant tasks, and as recompense, she will rescue his mother. In the current time, that is exactly the reason he eliminated that apparently normal girl, because she too was Japanese. Each instance he contemplates his mother, he is motivated to undertake any task required to rescue her. The setting transitions to Japan, within the Prime Minister's formal abode. The top official is speaking to his Minister of Defense. He inquires if any formidable creatures are concealed within the portals, to which the aide responds negatively. Then the elder statesman asks if formidable hunters exist in Korea. Once more, the aide states no, and that's when the Prime Minister erupts, severely questioning why their hunters have not yet conquered Korea. Yet, the bald gentleman before you is Prime Minister Ryuzuki Judo, and the aide swiftly offers apologies, vowing to rectify this predicament. The elder statesman desires to understand his intended course of action, and the aide asserts he will manage the problems personally. Evidently, the Minister of Defense is, in fact, also Japan's top-ranked hunter, Iko Kagairu. Following that strained dialogue with the Prime Minister, he departs, instructing his aide to ready his blade immediately. The woman inquires if he intends to proceed unaccompanied, and he affirms this. She notes that this could be perceived as impolite, but the hunters dispatched previously were all top tier, so why not bring some reinforcement? Naturally, that remark was unequivocally perceived as discourteous, particularly given the man is indeed the paramount hunter in the whole nation. The woman promptly apologizes for her preposterous proposition. Once he traverses through the portal, he proceeds through the passageways, reviling the combatants who perished here in this inferior grade port. Abruptly, some creatures leap to assault him, but he carves them up indiscriminately, while contemplating how those villains are defeated by beasts of this caliber. As he advances, he perceives something peculiar in the distance, and it is our hero perched directly atop a mound of deceased forms, belonging to Japanese combatants. The hunter experiences a blend of fury and elation upon seeing a powerful adversary. He swiftly brandishes his blade towards our hero, but our protagonist contrives to protect himself using his bones. This particular combatant is exceedingly arrogant, feeling revulsion at the sheer impudence of a creature attempting to obstruct his blade. He then lands an impact on Kang's torso, employing one of his elaborate techniques, first moon cleave, that propels our hero skidding across the terrain from a force. He continues with a subsequent moon cleave, and his assault carves through our hero. Yet it's insufficient to even penetrate his external skeleton. The combatant attempts a third moon cleave, but on this occasion, our hero evades and swings his arm. And precisely as he's poised to remove this villain's head, the combatant swiftly severs his hand. As the severed appendage soars away, the combatant brandishes his blade once more, and we discover his own head has also been completely severed, which simply tumbles across the earth. Kang's vision starts to fade, and recollections of his father surge through his consciousness. He remembers how his father was perpetually occupied with labor, yet remained cordial and affable, a quality he truly valued. Calamitously, his father perished protecting him. He shoved his offspring aside and was himself struck by the vehicle. With his father deceased, their enterprise disintegrated, leaving them overwhelmed by debt. His mother toiled relentlessly to ensure their financial survival, and each time he inquired if she faced difficulties, she would grin and affirm her well-being. Each evening, he lay sleepless and wept, unable to endure witnessing his mother's toil and sorrow. Ought not endure suffering for an individual like him. Consequently, one day, he seized a blade and commenced to incise his wrist, believing this action would liberate her. Precisely then, his mother entered the chamber. When he faced her, tears coursing down his countenance, he disclosed his awakening at that very instant. He embraced her firmly and vowed he would transform into a hunter, bringing her contentment. At the very least, that was his conviction until she found herself in the infirmary. He recalled the human's pronouncements reverberating in his thoughts. She informed him how the global equilibrium had been shattered and that numerous nations had already succumbed to hunter domination. She cautioned him that Japan represented their foremost adversary and implored him to become their monstrous weapon to track down those hunters. In the current time, the hunter confidently declares his status as Japan's preeminent hunter. He resheathes his blade and murmurs to himself about the excessive time already squandered and resolves he must personally journey to Korea. But precisely at that moment, he is astounded when Kang's cranium clamps down forcefully on his foot. He gazes at the skeletal remains, bewildered by the sheer impossibility of this. He can discern it possesses some form of mending power, yet he literally just severed its cranium. So, how was this transpiring? While grimacing in agony, he swiftly seizes his blade and strikes down upon Kang's skull anew. Subsequently, he employs his lunar ability and, abruptly, a pentagonal design manifests directly beneath their feet, and the hunter dematerializes from his position, moving with incredible velocity. A multitude of moonlight doppelgangers materialize, all converging directly upon Kang. They execute the 12th moon cleave, annihilating Kong into minuscule fragments and particles. The sheer power of the slashes disperses our hero's remnants everywhere. Fragments of him even eject from the portal, and the concluding strike possessed such intensity that it demolished a mountain externally. After being impacted by those errant slashes, even within the subterranean passage, the stones have been cleaved into segments. The hunter at last unwinds, advancing as he pulls his injured limb, muttering under his breath about his surprise that the creature managed to bite him. He resolves to mend it without delay. But just as this thought occurs, a bone impales his other leg. The man begins to perspire as he perceives an immense, lethal presence emanating from behind. Naturally, it's our hero still relentlessly pursuing him, even after forfeiting all his flesh. Kong is by no means prepared to allow this villain to escape. He is present to conclude what he initiated. The hunter seizes his blade, once more unleashing the entirety of his fury. But the subsequent events remain unknown, and the setting shifts to the exterior of the portal in Japan, where the Prime Minister, accompanied by a full retinue of hunters, is positioned by the gate, and these individuals are not mere novices. They constitute the Ministry of Defense's premier hunters, all congregated at this location. The Secretary inquires if they genuinely require such a large contingent to manage a single portal. The bald man then reminds her that 3 days have elapsed since the Secretary of Defense entered within. Thus he is apprehensive, pondering why he has not yet reemerged. Precisely as they are conversing, the severed head of Japan's foremost hunter tumbles at their feet, and out emerges our hero through the portal. The Prime Minister shrieks in alarm, but his vexing clamor is abruptly silenced when a swift cut removes his cranium. The setting transitions back to the Korean Hunter Organization, where the subordinate questions the head of the association if Kong can genuinely prevail against Japan's elite hunters. Well, the director of the association is already cognizant of the perils, so she simply grins and inquires of the subordinate if he is not, at a minimum, intrigue about whether Kong will emerge victorious against them or not. Precisely as she utters this, the scene reverts to our hero, who is struck by a formidable counteroffensive from none other than the Prime Minister himself. Astonishingly, even after his head is severed, it simply mends back. The impact of his blow is so immense that the earth beneath them fragments into pieces, and the remnants of our hero are scattered across the vicinity like ground meat. Well, it transpires that Japan's Prime Minister, Ryuzaki Judo, is by no means feeble. Indeed, he holds the rank of Japan's number 0, a triple S tier hunter. So, it's hardly surprising he annihilated Kong with a solitary blow. Before we re-engage with this intense confrontation, let's briefly revisit a prior period. Nearly 3 years passed. The majority of creatures from the portals were vanquished, and the sole remaining formidable entities in the world were the very hunters who had preserved the world. Thus, populations across the globe began to dread the hunter's might. A small number of nations attempted to eliminate the hunters, but, well, that endeavor did not unfold as anticipated for evident reasons. The hunters worldwide either forged agreements with their respective nations for coexistence, or subjugated them completely. And this is the manner in which each discovers their unique path to achieving dominance. Japan numbered among the nations that succumbed to a hunter's rule, and the rationale was uncomplicated. The Prime Minister, who was coincidentally a triple S rank hunter, he possessed an aggressive nature even prior to his awakening. And once the hunter framework materialized, he fixed his ambitions on seizing control of South Korea as well. However, his schemes encountered an impediment as soon as our protagonist intervened. Even after enduring that calamitous blow, Kong mends back to his original state as he rises once more. The hunters accompanying the Prime Minister swiftly launched an assault upon our hero. One among them brandishes his weapon, attempting to decapitate him. But contrarily, he finds himself decapitated instead. The other hunter discovers his visage crushed in the exchange. The Prime Minister and his associates can only observe in dismay as our protagonist stands before them, utterly unperturbed. They all become incensed, and the Prime Minister's aggression escalates as well, making it unequivocally clear that any individual moving from their position will be slain, personally by him. His pronouncements resonate heavily in the atmosphere, rendering everyone astounded into quietude. As our hero marches onward towards the Prime Minister, the setting transitions to a frigid day with gentle snowfall. There, the Prime Minister encounters a young lad out on the thoroughfares, shivering and near the point of succumbing to the cold. He inquired of the youth his purpose for being outdoors, but the youngster did not offer an immediate reply. Instead, he gazed upwards at the Prime Minister, questioning his identity. In the periphery, television screens are broadcasting the Prime Minister. Yet astonishingly, this child appears entirely unfamiliar with him. That's when Ryuzaki instructs him to accompany him, because the conditions outside are excessively frigid. And in that manner, he assumes responsibility for the boy. As they proceed, Ryuzaki inquires about the lad's name, and the boy responds, Kageryu. This is the very same Kageryu our hero dispatched within the portal. Witnessing the decapitated head of his most treasured offspring utterly infuriates the man. In an instant, he delivers a blow that sends Kong hurtling. But Ryuzaki is not finished. He follows with a relentless volley of punches, each strike more calamitous than the preceding one, until Kang's cranium is entirely blown off. As our hero topples backward, his cerebrum and cranium demolished, Ryuzaki unleashes a terrifying energy that incinerates and annihilates everything in its trajectory. Kong is diminished to merely a mound of skeletal remains, and everyone lauds the Prime Minister for his exceptional execution, which was something already anticipated from him. He outstretches his arm to grasp his child's cranium, but before he can make contact, we observe our hero reassembling himself, even after being reduced to bones and particles. The Prime Minister's gaze widens in astonishment, and his thoughts revert to bygone days, where we observe innumerable deceased forms of other hunters. The individual who dispatched them is the very same youth, Kaguya. The Prime Minister expresses remorse for compelling him to perform such unsavory tasks, but Kaguya reassures him it's of no consequence. He is simply gratified that Japan is at last within their control. That is when the Prime Minister alludes to their strategies to annex South Korea and China concurrently. So, he cautions him that he might perish on the next occasion, and if he is unwilling to engage in combat, he has the option to withdraw. But Kajiro swiftly reminds him he was the one who sheltered him when he lay perishing in the frigid conditions. Thus, he intends to settle that obligation for the remainder of his existence. Nevertheless, there's a single favor he seeks from the Prime Minister. He desires to address him as father. The Prime Minister deems him narrow-minded and reminds him that it is self-evident that he is his offspring. By this juncture in the current time, the ambience has grown intolerably strained, and the terrain beneath everyone's feet transmutes in a molten rock, owing to the Prime Minister's uncontainable fury. One of the hunters, a woman possessing cryokinetic abilities, swiftly congeals the ground, because she harbors no desire to be consumed by this searing molten rock. She exclaims towards the Prime Minister, who has entirely lost his composure. He no longer bears resemblance to a human. Instead, he appears more like a horrifying entity composed of fire, who is genuinely liquefying everything in his vicinity as if it were dairy spread. But my protagonist remains as composed as can be, and he commences to advance with assured strides. The mountain transforms into a volcano, which is on the brink of erupting, and as we converse, it erupts instantaneously. The Prime Minister has fully morphed into a grotesque monstrosity, a creature of unadulterated magma, poised to reduce everything and everyone to cinders. With a solitary motion, he unleashes blistering flames that begin to consume our hero. His flesh vanishes, consumed by fire, yet he still propels himself from the earth towards this villain. The Prime Minister unleashes an even greater quantity of magma from the earth, and it commences incinerating Kang's skeletal structure. The entire location descends into pandemonium as the other hunters flee in alarm, frantically attempting to preserve their own existences. The unadulterated intensity and ruinous capability transform the whole mountain into a colossal, lava-engulfed volcano. At last, Ryuzaki starts to compose himself, quietly observing as Kong is engulfed by the volcano he brought forth. However, despite being engulfed by the molten rock, Kang's thoughts remain steadfastly focused on reaching Ryuzaki. The Prime Minister comprehends this is far from concluded, so he summons Hanami, the cryokinetic woman. She promptly materializes, divests herself of her gauntlet and commences chilling the magma's surface, creating a rigid stratum to ensnare Kong beneath. As the exterior solidifies, Ryuzuki proffers a concluding adieu to Kong, instructing him to liquefy indefinitely beneath the molten rock. The setting then shifts to South Korea at the Kyeongkong Guild headquarters. There, we observe a woman exerting her utmost effort to mend a specific hunter. And this hunter is the very same individual who interfered with Kang's mother, and consequently had his posterior thoroughly defeated. However, it appears he has not yet succumbed to death. Events upon the mountain have at last begun to settle, and the Prime Minister instructs his hunters that only the most highly ranked among them shall remain, while the remainder are required to depart. All concur, and concurrently, we observe Kang's hand thrusting through the solidified crust of molten lava, agitating with ferocity. He is internally reflecting on how these imbeciles are trifling with lava as if it were a significant matter, when to him it's merely a minor irritation. You comprehend, within a blood portal, he endured temperatures tens of thousands of times more severe. Should you be uninformed about these crimson portals, I shall refresh your memory that the authors of this comic, in fact, altered his capabilities in the newest serialization of the comic. In this iteration, he becomes ensnared within the blood portal, where he endures torment and such by the creatures within the portal. Personally, I found the original Genesis story for his abilities more compelling. What are your thoughts? Which iteration did you find superior? Inform me in the remarks section, though. Even though this conflagration is inconsequential to him, still, the agony remains unbearable as consistently. Yet he must endure this irrespective of the circumstances. Eventually, Kong pierces through the resilient ceiling of solidified lava, leaving Hanami utterly confounded. She can scarcely credit her senses as he genuinely claws his way out from the abyssal depths. The Prime Minister is certain by this point that matters are about to escalate significantly. Therefore, he instructs Hanami to assemble the remaining hunters and locate a secure hiding place. She casts a look back at Kong and can comprehend why the Prime Minister is perspiring profusely. Then, the Prime Minister descends into the volcano itself, alighting directly beside our hero. The setting then transitions to a previous time in Japan, where Hanami is questioning his reasons for overworking himself, reminding him that magma mending is not all-powerful. The Prime Minister retorts by informing her that among the 4 principal hunter nations, which are, in order, USA, China, Russia, and Japan, Japan ranks as the least formidable. He harbors apprehension that if they fail to incorporate South Korea, Japan might not endure. Hanami clasps his brawny arm firmly, attempting to console him. She reminds him that numerous of their hunters will perish in the endeavor. However, the Prime Minister unequivocally states his intention to fight personally. If circumstances necessitate, he is prepared to offer his own physique, if it signifies safeguarding his nation. With that resolve in his thoughts, the Prime Minister strikes the earth with such force that Kong is propelled backward by the sheer impact. He then swiftly amasses immense power in his fist and lands a blow of such magnitude that Kong is sent smashing into the volcano's barrier and demolishes it in the process. Ryuzuki does not relent, persisting with his unyielding assault. As Kong is violently tossed about, he recovers his equilibrium, but the Prime Minister unleashes yet another colossal wave of fire upon him. The inferno strikes its intended target, severing Kang's hands and flinging his body away. Prime Minister simply doesn't cease his assault there. He propels himself into the atmosphere and descends with the force of a veritable meteor, causing the entire mountain to quiver with his godlike collision. Concurrently, Hanami reaches the other hunters and urgently communicates that the Prime Minister has mandated an evacuation. Notwithstanding the peril, she proclaims her intention to remain behind in his support. However, the other hunters decline to adhere to her directive. They offer her apologies and maintain they will not forsake the Prime Minister. They are excessively indebted to him for the aid he has rendered, and they stand ready to sacrifice their lives to safeguard him until the very conclusion. It is at this juncture they address her as the Prime Minister's spouse. Parenthetically, it's likely a positive development. They revise the Prime Minister's portrayal from a muscular elderly gentleman to a more youthful iteration, because the notion of him possessing a wife who could be mistaken for his offspring would have been considerably uncomfortable. Back within the volcano's core, The conflict persists. Ryuzaki is unremittingly forcing Kang further and further into the molten abyss. At a certain juncture, Kang's entire physique is consumed by fire, diminished to nothingness. But, as one might anticipate, he commences to reassemble once more. And shortly thereafter, he is laboriously emerging from the volcano yet again. Kang abruptly propels himself towards Hanami, which leaves the Prime Minister utterly incensed. Kang, conversely, seizes her cryokinetic hand, and he instantly begins to congeal as well. However, despite this, he drags her down into the volcano alongside it. The remaining hunters swiftly leap into the volcano to enter the conflict. Ryuzaki does not squander his opportunity either, and readies a devastating retaliatory strike. In a mere fraction of a second, he severs Kang's arm and pulls his spouse near, attempting to shield her. However, Kang contrives to decapitate Ryuzaki in the exchange. The severed head starts to descend, though it stays linked to the physique via Ryuzaki's magma abilities. But my hero does not let this opportune moment pass. He seizes Hanami's hand, the one possessing the power to congeal anything upon contact, and compels her to make contact with her husband's cranium. Before we witness Ryuzaki's head congealing, Kang finds himself fragmented into pieces by the other hunters, his physique shattered and his cranium detached. The other hunters inquire of Hanami if she is unharmed, but her thoughts are consumed by concerns for her husband's condition. She begins to shed tears upon realizing she has congealed her own husband's cranium before it could reattach to his physique. To deliver the final, decisive blow, Kang crushes that grotesque head underfoot, fragmenting it into smithereens. A surge of hopelessness engulfs them upon realizing this monstrous entity still persists. In the subsequent instant, he propels himself forward with astounding velocity, carving through everything in his trajectory, leaving Hanami in sorrow as she observes her companions succumbing like lifeless insects. Now, it is at last her occasion to be decapitated. In her concluding instance, her eyelids begin to droop, and she perceives her head detaching. At that moment, recollections surge forth, and she experiences vivid memories of the period spent with her spouse, instances brimming with elation and affection. However, as her head descends, those agreeable recollections contort into dread, signifying the forfeiture of all she treasured. With her awareness diminishing, she extends her hand to make contact with her own cranium, and at that very instant, she congeals herself completely. A calamitous conclusion to her wonderful existence shared with her spouse. Appendages are strewn about everywhere, and no one remains alive apart from our hero. He at last descends from the volcano, and resolves it is time to return to Korea. The setting then shifts to South Korea, inside the Kim Kong Guild's Mana Stone repository. There, we locate Tae-soo, that very same detestable individual, exerting himself intensely to enhance his strength. This woman, whose name I am unaware of, cautions him against overexertion, reminding him he was the sole individual with remaining mana, which explains his narrow escape from death. While his companions are already deceased, Tae-soo concedes the grim reality. He confesses to a vivid recollection of everything. Furthermore than that, he recalls how the nuisance he formerly tormented during their school years absconded from the blood portal and slew both him and his associates. It appears they have altered Tae-soo's abilities as well. The stones he is materializing, which previously exhibited a blue hue, now emanate a crimson color. We subsequently also discover he is the guild leader of Kim Kong, an S-rank hunter designated as Han Tae-soo. Driven by vengeance against Kong, he directs the woman to undo the restraint that has been limiting him. Sometime later, we observe her utterly depleted, gasping heavily as she struggles to regain her composure. However, despite her weariness, she conveys the positive tidings that the enchantment has been dispelled, and he is now at liberty to unleash his formidable powers. Tae-soo directs her to convene the members of the Kumkang Guild. Without delay, once they are assembled in the congregation hall, he stands upon the dais, and all lower their heads in deference. They conveyed their astonishment that he had been considered deceased, but now, with his survival confirmed, they are prepared to execute his every directive. The chief of Kim Kang's clandestine operations unit, an S-rank hunter by the name of Han Kong-chan, informs his superior that Kong has relocated to the portal, following the carnage in Japan. Before Kong-chan can articulate further, Tae-soo loses patience and simply commands them to eliminate that villain. Han acknowledges the directive, vowing upon their existences that the entire intelligence unit will execute the command. However, just as he concludes his solemn promise, Taisu simply decapitates Kang Chan, leaving the other members utterly astounded and motionless. As he clutches the severed cranium of his subordinate, we discover that Taisu has previously assimilated the Korea Hunter Association. 3 years passed. Taisu subsequently eliminates another individual by dismembering his limbs, and the physique detonates, showering gore profusely. The setting reverts to a prior time, where a young woman questions if undoing the seal is truly required, given his ability is accursed. Well, we're all quite familiar with his response. In the current instant, he commences eliminating everyone in proximity, and it is an absolute bloodbath. The constituents of the association flee for their safety, but their efforts are entirely futile. Taisu genuinely eliminates all 1,528 members of the guild and assimilates their energies into his own being. He is losing his sanity as he absorbs this immense power, while the woman simply succumbs to hopelessness, inquiring about the necessity of his actions. That is when Taisu reminds her that Kang dispatched the SSS rank prime minister, so he is certain that even after assimilating all these hunters, it will still prove insufficient to combat it. He is resolute in eliminating Kang, whatever the price, and is formulating plans to journey to Russia to acquire even greater strength. The setting then transitions to a harbor where we observe Lee Human, who promptly extends a welcome to Kang as he emerges from the portal. Subsequently, the scene shifts to the medical facility where Kang's mother is situated. We discover that Human has initiated the procedure to mend her. She employs her S-rank mending power to regenerate compromised cells, incrementally channeling her mana into the undertaking. She executes this procedure daily, as it demands a substantial amount of mana. Consequently, it will require some duration. However, she expresses certainty in her ability to rescue his mother. Once she concludes her customary mending session and exits the ward, she remarks that with continued daily effort, his mother will regain consciousness by the following week. Human then collapses to the floor from utter depletion, and Kang can discern this is exacting an immense toll on her mana reserves. He is inquisitive about her reasons for jeopardizing her well-being for this. She seizes his hand, perspiring copiously, and maintains that he must endure. Precisely at that juncture, verdant energy commences to shimmer as she clasps his hand. However, Kang swiftly withdraws his hand from her grasp. Conversely, the woman appears to deduce something, which is that Kang's transformation into a beast has advanced considerably within the confines of the Blood Gate. She discloses that since the portal's initial manifestation 15 years prior, all other portals have gradually transformed into blood portals. Since Kang absconded from one of the Crimson Blood portals, the alteration began to quicken. Consequently, all portals globally are metamorphosing into blood portals, and the mana emanating from them is imbuing him with strength. Regarding mana emanation, if a standard portal is an aperture, then a blood portal constitutes a conduit linked to an unknown location, and an entity is traversing through it. That specific entity is in pursuit of Kang. Precisely on schedule, horrifying creatures begin emerging from those crimson portals, and everything devolves into pandemonium. As everyone starts to lose their composure, it's simply carnage everywhere. The setting then transitions to the office of South Korea's president, where the entire presidential edifice is enveloped by a protective barrier. Within, the president is in a state of panic, insisting on knowing why the Kumkang Guild is unresponsive. The aide at his side somberly clarifies that the guild has been utterly destroyed. The president inhales sharply in disbelief, inquiring why. The aide concedes his uncertainty. He then queries the president about seeking assistance from foreign powers, but the chief executive dismisses that notion, stating it would be tantamount to inviting self-annihilation. He directs his aide to initially proclaim martial law, but the aide retorts that the armed forces are incapable of any action against those monstrous entities. The president reminds him it remains preferable to inaction, particularly since Kumkang Guild was not their sole strategic advantage. He clarifies their possession of additional hunters as well, and they are affiliated with Korea's second-tier guild, Dosa Guild. The premier A-ranker is John Woo-jin, and the woman beside him is Kang Se, who also holds an A rank. Then, there exists Korea's third-ranking guild, recognized as Vinyl Guild. Their leading A-ranker is an individual named Vinyl Man, while the woman is a markswoman known as Superwoman. Concerning Korea's fourth-ranked guild, that is the Yanghack Guild, they possess an A-ranker designated Yanghack and another A-ranker, Namjunyoung. As we speak, these hunters are already collaborating to repel the horrifying creatures emerging through the portals. However, it seems I expended my energy introducing this collection of vagrants for no discernible purpose, because these imbeciles have already been vanquished, overwhelmed by a mere palm strike from the creature's hand. We also observe our hero present there. So, does this suggest the hunter's deaths are his doing as well? Human just gazes his way and pointedly asks what he plans to do now. Precisely then, we notice a girl there on the thoroughfare, in peril of being obliterated by a massive monster's appendage. Much like the others, but true to form, our protagonist actually cleaves the creature clean in two and rescues the maiden in her dire predicament at once. It appears Human now possesses the answer to her prior inquiry directed at it, regarding his intentions and his next move. Kong then shares that when he perished inside the treacherous blood gate, the gate's potent mana attempted to transform him into a beast. He just barely withstood it, and consequently acquired an unusual regenerative power, or at least that's what he believed. As it happens, he received no such healing capabilities. However, the mana ensures he cannot actually achieve death until he fully metamorphoses into a monster himself. He grits his teeth with evident exasperation, recalling his recent efforts to finally lead a tranquil existence after ensuring his mother's well-being. But now, these monstrous entities have begun to interfere with his life. He snatches one creature and then proceeds to rip it apart. While he's dismembering this particular monster, our view shifts to the nexus point linking all the Crimson Portals. Within, an ethereal voice is heard, questioning if this young man initiated the rupture. This inquisitive voice originates from a truly fearsome, skeletal undead being, completely devoid of any flesh. Before we can even begin to comprehend this entity's nature, the perspective momentarily shifts back in time. There, Kong makes a solemn promise to Human. He will continue dispatching monsters, but she, in turn, must persist in healing his ailing mother. The woman consents to this arrangement, stating she will conduct the healing from her subterranean sanctuary, thus urging him to battle with all his might. As Kong is ferociously tearing through these creatures, he perceives a distinct familiarity about them. They're the identical foes he fought within the Bloodgate for 5 arduous years. He understands there's a cap on how many can emerge from a single portal, and given that the monster incursions have diminished, he deduces he's already eradicated all such beasts in the immediate area. If he successfully purges all monsters from every single Red Gate, he feels certain that he can finally achieve a joyful life with his mother. However, it doesn't appear it will be quite that straightforward, particularly upon noticing a few armed forces members. The soldiers observe him, awaiting their superior's directives, because the entity before them has not harmed any humans, only monsters. The commander declares that since this being is the disaster's origin, they must secure him until the hunter backup units finally appear. Naturally, this spells trouble for our protagonist, and those tanks promptly begin to shell him with the entirety of their available ordnance. Our unfortunate protagonist is being decimated by the unending assault, and it's genuinely taking a severe toll on him. He implores them to cease, as it is causing him serious injury, and tears begin to well in his eyes from the sheer agony and suffering. At last, the barrage of attacks ceases, but that's precisely when the nearby Red Gate starts to show activity. In that critical moment, Human's earlier counsel flashes through his mind, where she had previously cautioned him to exercise care, given that Red Gates had materialized everywhere. So it would prove challenging for him to resist his monstrification. Ultimately, he succumbs and eliminates all soldiers within his vicinity, a consequence of the Red Gates' powerful influence, and that is when he discerns something amidst the heap of bodies that provokes him to weep tears of pure blood. The narrative then flashes back once more to an earlier time, where Kong recollects all the profound suffering he has endured. Amongst all the tormentors, there was a single individual who consistently showed him compassion. This particular young man would frequently ask Kong why Taisu and his cronies singled him out. To this, our protagonist would respond that he's a vulnerable target, and that is the reason they harass him in this manner. He instructs his blonde-haired companion to always feign unfamiliarity between them, as he doesn't wish for him to be harmed by those very same bullies. Understandably, his friend becomes angered upon hearing this, attempting to make him see reason. He seizes Kong by his collar, demanding what on earth he is implying. But Kong averts his gaze, avoiding any direct eye contact, as there's no opportunity for discussion. Blondie at last resolves to drop the matter and departs on his own. And that's precisely how Kong seemingly lost his closest childhood companion. Or so he thought. His friend hadn't actually abandoned him. Instead, he had been diligently gathering proof using his awakened special ability, which allowed his right eye to capture any visual data. After amassing sufficient incriminating evidence, he compiled a compelling case and dispatched everything to the authorities, the education board, and multiple news outlets. But on the very next day, he tragically had his right eye gouged out. He expresses his apologies to Kong for not succeeding. He also regretfully mentions they won't be able to commute to school together any longer. Kong is overwhelmed by a mixture of rage and deep sorrow. He makes a solemn vow to his friend, pledging that he will ensure those culprits face due justice. But his friend firmly grips his shoulder and, with a grave expression, warns him against making such a grave error. Kong points out to him that now, having lost his special power, he's merely an ordinary individual. However, his friend maintains a surprisingly positive outlook, remarking there isn't much to existence regardless, and he intends to enlist in the military. And now, that very same friend's head is gruesomely impaled within Kang's own bones. The horrifying realization that he has killed his sole childhood friend leaves him completely and utterly shattered. Monstrous creatures lunge at him from his rear, but consumed by a paroxysm of fury and utter despair, he swiftly cuts them down with precision. These abominable monsters have deprived him of everything, and he desires their complete and utter annihilation. The subsequent scene shifts to the presidential residence, where the nation's leader observes our boy unleashing widespread destruction. His adjutant, positioned beside him, discloses that the entity they are witnessing on the current broadcast is the very same one that eliminated the guild, leader of the renowned Kyungkong Guild, and also Japan's own prime minister. Furthermore, he is the individual directly responsible for the emergence of Red Gates. Following some thorough investigation, it has been determined that they must eliminate it to restore these ominous Red Gates to their normal state. However, the president expresses curiosity regarding why this particular monster is battling the other creatures. The adjutant responds that they have not yet ascertained that information. But the crucial point is that even the other various monsters pose no significant threat against this entity. These blood gates have begun to proliferate internationally, and they can afford no further postponement. The president then inquires about the status of their domestic hunters, and the adjutant, with a somber tone, reveals that they have all been utterly wiped out. The president clutches his head in profound and utter frustration, because this situation has compelled him to make a choice he desperately wished to avoid, which is to reach out to the other nations for critical assistance. The scene subsequently transitions to a dimly lit, shadowy location, where this devious, hunched old man discloses to his superior that the very monster which eradicated the hunters in both Korea and Japan is also the prime cause behind the appearance of the blood gates. This revelation certainly piques the master's curiosity, and he is quite fascinated to discover more details about our protagonist. It is revealed that this man is China's foremost SSS rank individual, the renowned Lun Zhuguang. Next, the setting shifts, transporting us to a different country entirely. There, we observe a remarkably elegant lady, her features concealed beneath a delicate veil. She appears quite visibly irritated to learn that our central character is the one singularly responsible for all current unfolding events. This formidable woman is none other than Russia's top-tier SSS rank, the powerful Vladimir Ryazanov. Well, there is positively no refuting the fact that Russians are incredibly robust. Finally, the scene transitions once more to showcase America's #1 hunter. The agonizing cries of those in immense pain cause his heart to plummet, and he feels an overwhelming compulsion to enter the fray himself. However, his trusted assistant cautions him that if he departs now, what consequences will unfold regarding the ongoing war in Russia. The man then dramatically unfurls his powerful wings and unleashes a devastating surge of vibrant purple energy, which completely annihilates everything within his immediate sight. With that particular matter now decisively resolved, he concludes it's time to journey to Korea. This imposing figure is the Triple S rank powerhouse, Stephen Lucas. The scene then transitions, delving into a significant flashback. Here, our protagonist narrates how he endured 5 long years combating monstrous foes, deep within the confines of the Bloodgate. He vividly recounts the severe deprivations he faced, where he was unable to even consume food, drink water, or obtain sleep, constantly struggling merely to stay alive, utterly exhausted and on his last legs. Each instance he began to lose his grip on rationality. The insidious monstrification process would attempt to seize complete control. Yet, on every occasion, he vividly recalled 2 distinct faces. One, his dear mom, who had tragically lapsed into a persistent vegetative condition. And the second, the face of that despicable scoundrel responsible for her plight. That is how he successfully managed to repel the encroaching monstrification, by effectively channeling his intense anger. But has his firm resolve perhaps diminished now that he has exacted his revenge? Not quite. The mana contained within the Bloodgate has intensified significantly, rendering it more difficult to manage as he draws nearer to the gates. Due to that unfortunate circumstance, he has regrettably ended up killing innocent individuals. Now, he has firmly resolved to confront the gates and eradicate all remaining monsters. Yet, he deeply ponders if he will ever truly be able to make amends for that. Right at that very moment, Kong sustains a blow of such incredible force that his head instantly detonates, and his eyes and tongue are sent grotesquely flying away. The individual responsible for this incredibly brutal assault is none other than the American, Lucas. The scene then abruptly shifts into yet another flashback. Here, Kong narrates that in the year the gates first manifested, specifically during Christmas time, Lucas was delivering his sermon within the Grand Cathedral when those ominous green gates suddenly materialized directly inside the sacred place. Monsters began to pour forth relentlessly, and there were unfortunately no hunters present to rescue anyone. However, it was also the precise instant the future president awakened his latent powers and miraculously gained his magnificent wings. The church he managed was America's largest, with approximately 100,000 faithful believers congregated there. In that ensuing chaos, a total of 138 people sustained injuries. But remarkably, thanks to his intervention, there were 0 fatalities. He consequently became the very first SSS rank awakened individual globally. And that is how he rightfully earned his esteemed reputation as the hero who saved America. When Kong was considerably younger, he used to greatly admire this particular man. And now, that very same legendary hero is standing directly before him. As Kong rapidly regenerates and gets back on his feet, he cannot help but wonder why Lucas is present in their country. The man, however, doesn't squander another precious second and begins to pummel Kong relentlessly. But despite all of his strenuous efforts, he is quite disappointed to witness Kong regenerating repeatedly, time after time. Frustrated by this, he unleashes his potent abilities once more, violently forcing Kong in a backward direction. But just as Kong is on the verge of being thrust into the Red Gate, he somehow manages to propel himself away in an instant. Kong then reveals to the audience that awakened individuals can indeed communicate telepathically through mana. So he resolves to attempt conversing with Lucas. He swiftly informs him that he is not the monstrous entity they perceive him to be, and as soon as Lucas processes this crucial information, he halts his assault immediately. Kong subsequently takes his time to meticulously explain everything that has transpired. And once Lucas fully comprehends his perspective of the story, he pulls Kong into a compassionate embrace, genuinely sharing in his pain and deep sorrow. As he holds him in a tight hug, he gently asks Kong for his name, and our protagonist responds to him without any hesitation. Lucas then mournfully expresses how he exclusively fights to protect people. Yet on this particular day, he has been forced to eliminate many of them. He removes his upper garments, revealing his impressively sculpted physique, where he has inscribed the names of every individual he has lost throughout the years. He solemnly pledges to assist Kong and help take down all the monsters, but issues a grave warning that during this endeavor, the terrible calamity of the Red Gates will inevitably spread across the entire globe, and consequently, a great many people will perish. He offers his sincere apologies to Kong for what he is about to undertake, because he will do absolutely anything to keep the casualties minimal. He then quickly adds Kang's name to the extensive list of his many victims, and it doesn't take much time for Kong to realize he's in serious trouble. Lucas employs his terrifyingly destructive powers, once more in an attempt to kill Kong. And this time, he's clearly not holding anything back. The scene then shifts focus to a building's subterranean level, where Human is diligently healing Kang's incapacitated mother, while simultaneously observing the intense fight unfold live via the broadcast. Her assistant appears visibly concerned, noticing that Human is exerting herself far too much, to the critical point where she has actually begun to bleed profusely from both her eyes and nose. Meanwhile, at an undisclosed location within Russia, the formidable Russian woman clicks her tongue in clear annoyance when she discovers that Lucas has completely eradicated everyone on the entire battlefield and has subsequently departed for Korea. What irritates her most profoundly is the dawning realization that he has been deliberately restraining his true powers. All this time, a soldier, visible on the broadcast, grimly informs her that they have already suffered losses of 80% of their forces, rendering it utterly impossible to maintain the crucial front line. At this alarming rate, he is absolutely certain that American hunters will soon overrun Russia. Just as he voices this dire prediction, he meets his own demise as well, which only serves to further exacerbate the lady's mounting frustration. She fervently wishes that if they could somehow just capture that elusive Arctic monster, circumstances would become considerably less difficult for her. Precisely then, an individual confidently strides into her private chambers, and that person is revealed to be Tai-Su. He makes a solemn promise to assist her in capturing the formidable Arctic monster. The last time we encountered him, he was on a determined quest to acquire greater power, in order to exact his vengeance specifically against Kong. But now, he has surprisingly appeared here in Russia. Let's observe what unfolds subsequently, and what his actual underlying motive is for traveling all this considerable distance, before we witness how this striking Russian beauty reaches an agreement with Tai-Su. Let's delve a bit deeper into the background of this infamous Arctic monster. This particular creature was the very first SSS-ranked monster ever officially documented, when this monstrous entity made its initial appearance. Russia's entire Arctic military base was obliterated almost instantaneously. The Russian government was caught completely unaware of the gate's existence and the subsequent arrival of the monster. Consequently, they mobilized the entirety of its available forces to try and contain it, but their efforts ultimately proved futile in the end. Fully half of the nuclear armaments within the nation's entire arsenal were deployed. However, lacking the crucial power of mana, the devastating strikes failed to kill the monster. The resulting radioactive contamination transformed Russia's vast northern expanse into a desolate wasteland teeming with monsters. To recover their vital resources, the Russian government eventually, and perhaps desperately, declared war on America. Now it becomes clear why. Lucas had eliminated those Russian soldiers in the preceding chapter, and this provides crucial insight into the origins of that particular conflict. Regardless, Tai-Su boldly asserts he can indeed slay this monster. She inquires about his specific identity, and he identifies himself as a Korean S-ranked hunter. The woman, seated upon her throne, is clearly annoyed by this upstart, intruding uninvited into her presence, and she is not particularly impressed by his confident demeanor, as he audaciously boasts about his supposed capability to defeat the Arctic monster. She's thoroughly convinced he is grossly overstating his abilities. Consequently, she employs her powers to forcefully pin Tai-Su and his companion down. However, Tai-Su refuses to yield an inch. He persistently continues to make provocative remarks towards her, even caustically reminding her how she was also outmaneuvered by America. He confidently promises he can vanquish America as well. The The woman becomes increasingly irritated listening to all this apparent foolishness, but ultimately chooses to advance the current discussion. She questions if he can genuinely endure the intense radioactivity. Taisu responds with unwavering self-assurance. Yes. She follows up, inquiring if he intends to utilize a shield, since such a defense is utterly ineffective against extremely high concentrations of radioactivity. That is precisely when she observes something peculiar. There's a veritable maelstrom of immense power contained within this individual. He's even managing to push back against the immense force that was previously pinning him to the floor. Visibly impressed, she finally proposes a formal agreement. If Taisu can successfully vanquish the formidable Arctic monster, she will grant him a share of 30% of its valuable mana stones. However, she quickly reconsiders and then increases the offer to a generous 50%. Yet, Taisu doesn't appear to be particularly captivated by this. He doesn't even attempt to negotiate further. He simply accepts the assignment and coolly assures her he will return shortly. We now rejoin Kong, who is being completely and utterly torn apart by this scoundrel. This man, who sincerely and profoundly believes himself to be the most righteous individual ever to live. He is exerting such an immense amount of power that Kong literally begins to completely fall apart. But regardless of how fiercely this adversary tries, Kang's single eye still somehow manages to remain intact, and he regenerates fully back to his previous form. However, on this occasion, Kong makes the strategic decision to beat a hasty retreat. He recognizes he cannot possibly defeat this particular monster at this moment. But before he can successfully make his escape, that self-righteous villain apprehends him. Kong desperately attempts to impale him using his bone, but the forceful attack phases harmlessly right through the villain's ethereal, transparent form. Yet again, the adversary envelopes Kong in another crushing, tight embrace. And once more, Kong starts the horrifying process of disintegration. As he is dematerializing, his eye remarkably persists. But despite his constant regeneration, the antagonist relentlessly continues to kill him each time, with a chilling, cold decisiveness. Lucas calmly reassures him that regardless of how many times he perishes, he will not experience any physical pain. This particular remark unexpectedly triggers some deeply painful memories for Kong. With his unique exoskeleton manifestation special ability, he could encase his skin within a formidable protective shell. But this came at an incredibly terrible price. The sheer agony that invariably accompanied it in that infernal red gate. Every single moment was an unceasing battle against truly excruciating pain. Yet he somehow managed to endure it all, powerfully driven by revenge and flickering hope. However, Lucas's devastating instant death offensive maneuvers, compelling him to regenerate constantly, immediately, and vastly surpassed even the most intense pain he had ever experienced. Now, he finds himself trapped in a brutal, relentless cycle of completely disintegrate, with unimaginable, profound agony, and then rapidly regenerating, only to immediately endure the exact same horrific pain once more. Though he has previously been capable of withstanding intense, severe suffering, this current pain has ascended to an entirely new, transcendent plane of existence. The perspective abruptly shifts to a specific moment in Kang's earlier past. In school, Kong is quietly attending to his own affairs, passively watching a video recording of Lucas when Taisu casually approaches and inquires if he is viewing Lucas yet again. Kong affirms this with a nod and openly confesses that he holds a great deal of respect for this specific hunter. Taisu concurs that Lucas's extraordinary abilities are indeed quite impressive, but he then pointedly asks Kong what his own ability is. This unexpected question clearly catches Kong completely off guard, but he eventually, somewhat reluctantly, reveals that his particular ability is exoskeleton manifestation. This was the pivotal moment Taisu started to focus his malicious attention towards Kong. From that point onward, Kang's agonizing suffering with bullying and relentless pain commenced, leaving him perpetually wondering what he had possibly done to deserve such such torment. The utterly broken and profoundly defeated Kong questions his very own existence, pondering if he and his terrifying monstrous self should even continue to be here. If they persist in living, more unsuspecting innocent people could potentially die. And even if he perishes, his beloved mother will also be able to live securely. A thought that currently feels like the utmost he could possibly hope for. His inner monster self, however, does not remotely share his crippling doubts. It simply and defiantly shows a metaphorical middle finger to all the pain and regret, adamantly refusing to surrender. In that critical moment, an ominous dark and crimson energy begins to vividly shimmer around our protagonist, powerfully drawn from the numerous nearby red gates, infusing him with an almost unimaginable, immense power. With this newfound, terrifying, monstrous strength, he finally and devastatingly manages to tear a gaping hole into Lucas's physical body. High above, an unmanned drone diligently captures all the incredibly intense, action-packed footage, broadcasting it live for absolutely everyone worldwide to witness. Lucas's devoted followers are completely transfixed to the screen, fervently praying for him as they intently watch him fight, and prominent among them is his only beloved son, anxiously observing the unfolding events. Meanwhile, the very building where Human has been diligently healing Kang's ailing mother begins to catastrophically crumble around them. Thankfully, Human and Kang's mother are situated safely in the basement, which I believe offers them some measure of vital protection. But the arduous healing process is exacting a truly severe toll on Human's frail body. If she continues to push herself any further, she's almost certainly fated to die. At that precise moment, Human suddenly collapses heavily onto the ground. Her loyal assistant immediately rushes to her fallen side, desperately and frantically trying to provide aid. Despite every harrowing circumstance, Human feels a profound sense of relief that the crucial treatment is finally blessedly complete. And just as she utters these significant words, Kang's mother miraculously opens her eyes for the very first time in many long years, at long last emerging from her debilitating vegetative state. The scene abruptly transitions back to Russia, where Taisu determinately makes his way through the dangerously contaminated atmosphere, his entire mind singularly and intensely focused on Kong, standing defiantly before the notoriously fearsome monster that has successfully kept the entirety of Russia perpetually on edge. Taisu is not contemplating the immediate, formidable threat before him whatsoever. His thoughts are completely fixated on the image of Kong, who is, at this very moment, engaged in battle with Lucas, and Taisu is utterly and profoundly astounded by this fact. The scene then transitions, returning our focus to our protagonist, where we observe that his physical appearance has become more terrifyingly furious than ever before. Witnessing Kong in this transformed state deeply touches Lucas's heart. He can clearly perceive that Kong must have endured an unimaginable amount of suffering to be currently exuding such a profoundly ominous and menacing aura. With that sobering thought firmly in mind, Lucas seizes him once again, his tremendously massive muscles constricting tightly around his captive form. And, as has become customary, he begins the process of disintegrating our hero. But, as is always the case, Kong rapidly regenerates, returning even more powerfully than before. This instance, he fiercely retaliates with all the formidable monstrous power he has been steadily accumulating. However, Lucas simply transforms into this ethereal purple light and effortlessly slips through the powerful strike without sustaining a single scratch. Lucas then begins to wax somewhat philosophical, pensively musing about how, on certain occasions, merely having someone attentively listen can truly make all the significant difference. Because of this profound realization, he decides he desires to be the one to obliterate everything. With that grim resolve, he reaches directly into Kang's very skull, fully intent on utterly destroying him decisively and for all time. But Kong is far from finished. He swiftly and powerfully retaliates, completely severing Lucas's attacking hand and thereby creating sufficient distance between them. Even with his hand now gruesomely severed, Lucas's facial expression only appears more disturbingly sinister. The detached hand, still grotesquely lodged deep inside Kang's head, abruptly and violently explodes, causing Kang's own head to gruesomely burst as well. As Kang's now lifeless body slumps, Lucas's severed hand begins to rapidly regenerate, completely reforming itself without the slightest hint of pain or any struggle. Then, Lucas shares a profoundly unsettling and twisted revelation. Ever since the moment he first gained his extraordinary powers, he perpetually and constantly hears various sounds. The desperate, agonizing cries of those suffering deeply from widespread famine, debilitating illness, and devastating disasters. The piercing, desperate screams of those fervently hoping to be saved. However, he has discovered a strange solace in something entirely different. Among these truly agonizing and heart-wrenching cries, he also distinctly hears other, contrasting voices. The sincere voices of profound gratitude, the uplifting voice of unwavering support and enduring hope, and the joyful, resonant echoes of pure happiness from those who have been successfully saved. And all of this, quite perversely, just excites him without any conceivable bounds. Lucas makes a swift attempt to grab Kong with those incredibly enormous hands that seemingly materialized out of absolutely nowhere, and he instantly crushes him like a completely insignificant tiny bug. But Kong incredibly regenerates from within the very palm of Lucas's massive hand, pushing with all of his formidable might to desperately break free. For a fleeting moment, he actually manages to pull himself completely free. But once again, Lucas effortlessly squashes him flat, seemingly without exerting any significant effort whatsoever. But eventually, Kong, with a tremendous surge, finally forces himself out of Lucas's powerful grip, liberating himself successfully one more critical time. With a visibly renewed and terrifying fury, he charges directly at Lucas. But the man simply and calmly extends his hand and deliberately draws a symbolic cross upon Kang's forehead. Kang's body inexplicably begins to move entirely on its own accord, and he horrifically rips his own chest wide open. Then Lucas commences pouring an absolutely overwhelming, torrential flood of prayers, fervent hopes, and intensely positive energy directly into Kang's exposed body. These incredibly intense, raw emotions and powerful feelings are specifically meant to break him, to completely and utterly shatter his mind and his very spirit. As the ceaseless prayers begin to fill Kang's vulnerable mind, he starts to feel increasingly trapped and disoriented inside his own head. He is completely overwhelmed by the sheer flood of sensations, entirely unsure of what is currently happening or what he is even doing. All he comprehends is the truly excruciating, unbearable pain, the distinct and overwhelming feeling that it is simply too much to endure. The prayers, replete with unwavering faith and profound hope for ultimate salvation, suffocate Kang's very mind. Instead of genuinely empowering him in any way, they instead fill him with an all-consuming, paralyzing fear. The sheer, crushing weight of all the prayers, all the immense respect and unwavering faith Lucas has painstakingly amassed, begins to completely drown him, making him feel utterly and hopelessly powerless. Eventually, the burden becomes far too much, and Kong is horrifically obliterated once again, completely swallowed by the truly overwhelming, irresistible force of the prayers. From those countless individuals who desperately wish to be saved, those who fervently desire Lucas to finally vanquish the perceived evil. Returning our focus to Taisu, it is abundantly clear the formidable Arctic monster is giving him an exceedingly tough time. As he desperately struggles, an incredibly irritating thought takes firm root in his mind. This particular monster, as terrifying as it undeniably is, doesn't even remotely compare to that formidable American adversary, Lucas. And if he cannot even manage to successfully kill this current beast, then Taisu is absolutely convinced that there is no conceivable way he will ever stand a chance against Kong. Powerfully fueled by this stark and sobering realization, Taisu unleashes a truly relentless and devastating series of powerful strikes, fiercely determined to overcome this grotesque monstrosity so he can ultimately face Kong. Meanwhile, Kong begins to draw immense power once again from the nearby red gates. As soon as he had fully regenerated back, Lucas, without wasting even a single precious second, lands a brutally powerful punch on Kong, sending him violently drilling down through multiple layers of the building and crashing hard down into the dark basement area, where he eventually lands heavily amidst shattered rubble in the murky sewer below. As he lies there, helplessly buried deep within the debris, his beloved mother miraculously appears directly before him. Even though he is currently a completely transformed monster, it doesn't take his mother very long to intuitively realize that the being before her